Hey guys, Clay Westfall here with Bushwhacker Bait Company, and I have another video that I'm putting out on Lake Travis. Basically, I did a first complete guide to fishing, bass fishing on Lake Travis, and I felt like there was just so much that I wanted to include in that video that I didn't. And so this is my second attempt at making the complete video. So this is going to be the more complete video. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to start out to make sure I cover all the points that I want to hit with sort of an outline here. So I have a little piece of paper off to the side, and I'm going to kind of write out, what I think are top priorities. The first one that I want to kind of touch on here is going to be what types of areas do I want to fish in this lake. Okay, so there's going to be three different types of areas. There's going to be a bluff style of area. There's going to be like offshore structure, and then there's also going to be docks. Hopefully my writing isn't too loud, so I'm going to put like a little book under it, but those are the three things: so bluffs, offshore structure, and docks. There's creeks, of course, for springtime and all that, and in fall, but I would say the majority of the year you can pretty much do the majority. You can do the bulk of your like big bass hunting specifically in three different groupings, which are the ones that I just told you about. So I'm not looking for like 1 month or 2 month snapshots out of the season with spawn or bait migrating to the back of pockets. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for what is the most stable year-round approach. And so with that, what I'm going to say is let's just talk about how to identify these areas and what in particular distinguishing features I want to kind of point out. So that white color is going to be the deepest water in the area. So while blue is the shallowest, white is going to be the deepest. And so bluffs are a geographic feature that is formed from of course, you have current situations with rivers before a dam is established on a river system. The outside of that bend of that creek channel, where there originally was just a stream or a creek, like, obviously this is a big river, Colorado River, but that outside bend is the cut bank, what we call the cut bank. So that's going to be where you have the deepest, sharpest drops, right? So in this example, I can look and zoom in here, and we have this floating dock system right here. This is a flat that extends out, quite a ways, and it's not so much like how do I say this? The contour lines are pretty spread out, relatively speaking. And this is actually, although it says 70 feet, 100 feet here, this is a big flat. You go from shallow here, to where it's white, it's deeper, like I said. But geographically speaking, whenever you have lines that are clearly distinguishable from one another and they're spaced apart, that indicates a flat situation. So where it's pure white here, on the outside, where this river channel is, that's going to be, really deep. And so then when I look and I zoom in on the opposite side, it's hard to, when I zoom in just a little bit like there, what you see is on the outside of this bend, like I was talking about, where you have that cut bank situation where the current is ripping around and it's eroding the feature of the landscape and it's becoming steep. You have these contour lines. It's like very black here. It's a very black band that you see against the wall here, and so that's indicative of really shear. So in contrast to how the lines are spread out over here, when you look over here, it looks like just one solid dark band. That means that all the contour lines are right on top of each other. So if each contour line represented 1 foot, for example, it would be like 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, but like really condensed. So it's changing, the slope increases and the bank is a lot more sheer. So that's where you would find the bluffs. It's very easy in any lake. You don't have to go out and look at like a Google Earth, you can just look at like an avionics like this and find those outside creek channel bends. So once again, this main deal here is the river, the original river before it was dammed. Okay, you have little feeder creeks and stuff, but the main river is what I'm concerned with. So it touches on this corner here. It also touches down here, quite a few places. It touches up here, right? So all of those are going to be the areas where I'm going to find bluffs, okay? And so talking about bluffs, what am I looking for when I fish bluffs, right? So first of all, is the whole bluff good? What kind of baits am I going to throw in these areas? How am I going to set up to fish these areas? And so let's just start with, on the bluff itself, what areas are you going to fish? So there's a couple different things that I look for. So if I zoom in here, just for an example, this is a corner right here where you have sort of like a shallow flat situation converging with the sheer bluff, and that transition where it fans out from really steep to shallow, that transition point is always a great area to start fishing. Okay, that's one good area. Now I look at the other side over here where you have this flat point that comes out and it gets very sheer next to this flat point. That's another good area. So those are two corners. That's the two opposite ends of the bluff, right? The bluff doesn't look like, based on where the channel feeds in, that it extends over to this point necessarily all the way. It obviously doesn't. The severity may reduce like right in this area here where it kind of tapers in, and touches. Really the main bluff is from here back to where I had shown you on the right. But this flat point can be really good because it's still proximal to that channel, relatively speaking, and it's the main. This is a very prominent point, right? And so I don't know, just looking at this, I mean, there could be so many of these throughout the lake, right? I mean, it's a pretty normal thing to see, is where you have a creek channel bend and it breaks away from the bank to have that nearby point. That could be pretty good. If it was a little bit farther away, I wouldn't be as excited to fish it, but I'm always wanted to stay pretty close to the main river channel for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into. But yeah, so I'll fish the ends. If it was one big bluff, I would still fish the ends. Anywhere where it tapers out, and you have that sheer in close proximity to that kind of more of a flat. It's a transition point. So in those types of areas, and it's not just these. I mean, it's not like, let me memorize specifically where he's showing me all these areas. That's really the wrong way to go about it. You have another channel swing here from like right here to here. And so maybe this point's really good, This is a transitionary area from this sheer bluff to this flat point here. And so just identify transitions, that's such an important concept for fishing. And the goal here is to take this information and be able to replicate it not only on Lake Travis, but on many different lakes, right? And so it may have been kind of a basic introduction, but I hope that gives, a little insight as to how I'm thinking about these things. On a bluff, there's a few different baits that I'm going to throw because a fish positions itself, or it moves vertically more than it does horizontally on a bluff, generally speaking. Now there's times when they're cruising along the bluff and they're hunting on that depth break where it may go from like 5, 6, 7 to like 30. They'll cruise that line. That's a very common thing to see, but a lot of times when they're setting up on these bluff situations, it's in the summer period or the winter period, which is pretty much, I mean, we have a really extended warm period in Texas. So they're going to conserve energy and go up, and they're going to go down, and they're going to use that portion of the water column rather than spreading out. And so I like to use vertical presentations. What vertical presentations are there? There's spoons. That's a really, really good one. That's often overlooked. Okay. There are drop shots. That's another one. um, with those two, I'm trying to think what's the best way to say this. There's also, let me just add another one. I mean, I'm trying to just include all the ones that might be helpful. So there's hair jigs. That's one to look up online because it could be really good. So there's hair jigs, spoons, there's drop shots. So I'm just thinking very vertically right now. Also, there's suspending baits. Not necessarily just vertical, but they stay in that same layer of water and the movement isn't a whole lot this way, right? So I would include that kind of in those presentations, like a suspending jerkbait that you can just get down to the certain depth that you want to be at, jerk it a couple times, and it's moving more in place than it actually is traveling a distance. So that would be one that I would include, the jerkbait, suspending jerkbait. And then I would say the non-vertical presentations that I would mostly use for a bluff wall are going to be either like a jig. And what I'm doing with that jig is I'm throwing it. I'm actually, normally I don't fish really perpendicular to the structure if I know that the line of the structure, meaning where it goes from the 5 or 10 to 30, I try to stay on that line where they're hunting. But in this situation, the situation when I use like jigs and all that, like traditional jigs, not hair jigs, but traditional football jigs and stuff like that, I'll throw almost perpendicular, maybe a little skewed off to the edge, onto the side. And my whole thing is I'll hop it up in an area that's like a high percentage area. I won't just go down the bank throwing perpendicular bank, but I'll find an area where there's like rock piles or there's like a piece of boulder that fell off into the water, and I'll just pop that jig and hop it. It's a very vertical approach with the jig, and so that's something I do a lot. Like I said, I don't do it randomly. I'm selective about it. But the other thing would be swim baits. I do swim baits a lot, and also you can do umbrella rigs, like an Alabama rig. So what I'll do with the swim bait is I will follow the contour. I'm not going to fish the entire bluff. I'm still going to fish what I would consider high percentage areas, but I'm fishing more of a region than a spot, if that makes sense. And so I throw out that swim bait. I figure out what depth everything's suspended at, and I try to keep that swim bait in that zone. And I'm trying to follow around those deep balls of shad. So that's one thing I do a lot. So hair jigs, spoons, drop shots, suspending jerk baits, traditional jigs, and then also the swim bait. Okay, so like I said, look for the transitionary areas, meaning the corner where the channel swings in first and where it peters out on the other end. That transition between the flat and the shear. Look at those ends, and then also look on the way across that length. Look for boulders that have fell in and trees, maybe like standing trees. Just look for things that are different along that length. I wouldn't spend, I mean, maybe, but I wouldn't spend the entire time fishing the whole thing. I just try to be really efficient. Okay, so that is the bluffs. Let's see, that's a pretty, hopefully that's pretty repeatable for you guys, and you can kind of visualize it and see how I'm thinking. It's not just about these spots. So don't even, I mean, I could look at any lake in the United States and make these decisions. Offshore, okay? So I'm gonna look at some of the areas that I like for offshore fishing, okay? One of the areas that I really like is like over here. This is a flat here, but it's a deep flat again. And you have these little feeder creeks that come in off of this main river channel. So this is a feeder creek here. This is a feeder creek here. And I'm essentially, there's also like a submerged culvert. This looks like a road, right? So I'm looking for points that have the hardest drop. So like this one here, you got a pretty shallow bar here that drops off really, really hard into this little minor creek that's coming through here, this creek bed. Like the ends of these, the tops of these, You know, I'm anywhere where you have that very stark difference between that flat and the drop off, but it converges into a tip, like off of this point. That gives me a small spot to focus on that I know that there's going to be a concentration of fish. If you consider this like an underwater bluff, for example, like we just said, let's say it was 200 yards or 100 yards or whatever it is, that whole length, along that length, it makes it harder because I'm looking for an individual spot where everything's, you know, focused and concentrated. Here it makes it much easier because this is not 200 yards, you know, this is not a huge area. And so they're likely either going to be on the top of this little hill structure, or they're going to be right off the very edge on the break over here, but they're going to be close. And so I would focus on it, and I would hit it from different angles. I'd come around the front of it and throw up the point. Then I'd come off the end of it and throw down the point. And then I'd throw across the point. And then I'd switch baits, and I'd keep doing things to give a different look. But that point, where it comes to a point that gives me such an advantage because I know that I'm not wasting my time, there's fish like there. As long as I see them, you know, and all that, obviously on my graph and their structure, cover, I mean, on the structure, that's what's important. But that really helps. So those little convergence points where it funnels them in there. Another one would be like, let's just see here. Hold on. You know, you have this little shallow area right here, okay? It doesn't have to be this. I'm just trying to point out like areas that are good or could be good, okay? Like here's a roadbed. The roadbed creates just another little extra, something little extra, right? So it's not this spot. I'm just looking around the lake, picking things, but it just gives that a little extra. So let's just say, let's look at this point, for example. Okay, here's a little shallow hump, 11 feet. Okay, here's another, it's a little deeper of like a little high spot over here. Let's just say this is, I think it's like 33 feet right here versus 46, right? So there's a drop here. This is kind of an extension of that little high area. You got the road going through there, so that adds another feature because you're going to have, you know, kind of a little ditch that you're going to see on the graph. You know, it's going to have a variation in the bottom. That's something that's interesting to fish. This shallow bar here has this creek bed right next to it, and you can go all the way off to the ends here and fish a couple different areas. You can graph this, but this is a very obvious, to me, it's obvious in the respect that not only is it next to that clear, that cool water, and that fresh oxygen-rich water with that creek bed, but it's also got that really concentrated and predictable spot where the fish may congregate up on top here, right? And so obviously it's a shallow area. This lake has a tendency to get low, so a lot of that's probably unfishable. But you know, in terms of it, even if it has a little bit of water, I wouldn't be probably fishing it. I like to stay around like 20 feet, 25 feet, 20, somewhere in there. But I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what I'm looking for. You know, this one that I set over here with the roadbed, that's a nice little extension off of this flat. You know, very, very unique land formation, if that makes sense. This little icon here means that there's a little fish attractor. So Texas Parks and Wildlife puts a fish attractor out here. So this just so happens that it's right next to the roadbed, so maybe that's a good area, you know. But that, I just wanted you to know what that icon means in case you don't know. You know, this is a really good area here. So what you have is, if I zoom out, it's hard to really tell, but if you look closely at all of these little loops that are in and out, this specific one that goes in and out, it has a little bit of a harder break right here. Okay, so the lines are just a little bit tighter. You have to pay attention to really notice it, right? This whole flat, every time it makes an indentation like that and loops, that change in direction is attractive because it creates a transition situation. And obviously you have this deep water running up here, and this is what you'd call like in my mind, what you'd call like a ditch or a drain, is what I would call it. where it comes up here shallow and there's this U shape. And I've done really good in areas like this, but specifically looking at the whole flat here, that one area for whatever reason is a lot more sheer right there. So I would maybe fish the tip of this little point right here. I'd fish off the end. I'd throw across here, and I would just really check out this area, you know, just to see. I would throw some different baits. That's one thing. So as far as the offshore, what are my favorite things to do on the offshore? So there's a couple ways to answer that. Number one is that I'm looking for, I need to know if the fish are on the bottom, if they're in the middle of the water column. That really is important to me. So if they're kind of suspended off the bottom, or if there's like brush, and the crown of the brush is a little higher, I'm probably going to use like a Carolina rig. Okay, that's like one of my favorites. If I know that they're near the bottom more, I'm going to either throw a Texas rig or I'm going to throw a football jig. Okay. If it's rocky, so that's the thing. I'm either looking for areas with wood, or I'm looking for areas that have like rock, like a little rock patch in an area that's all sand would be badass. And in that situation, I'm gonna do more of the. I will be probably more likely to pick up like a drop shot. I would try the drop shot. I don't like it to break off, you know. Of course, no one does, but if it's open like that and it's just a rocky area I'm fishing, I might try the drop shot. But mainly Carolina rig, Texas rig, football jig. If I can get down deep enough and there's enough wind and I'm moving and hitting enough spots and I want to be efficient, I'll throw like a crankbait, like a deep diving crankbait on light line, so I can get down there to where I need to be, and I'll also make a super long cast, you know, and take my time reeling it down to really achieve that depth and hopefully make contact with that brush. That's the most important thing, is the contact. You can catch a lot of fish on a crankbait is if you know that the school's concentrated somewhere. Like if you can get the arc to come through the school, where what I mean by that is if you can get when the bait turns up towards the boat, as long as it arcs in front of the fish, that's a good way to do it. So, but if not, I'm trying to make contact. So Carolina rig, like I said, if they're like middle, Texas rig, football jig at the bottom, maybe a drop shot if it's not brush, but it's more kind of sparse rock or just kind of rocky, right? And then deep diver. What would I add to that? If it's like a field of trees, there's a lot of treetops to where there's a lot of collisions that can happen. Not only will I try the deep diver, but I'll try like swim baits, or I'll try, and especially because it's such a clear water lake, this is, or I'll try like spoons. You know, that spoon when it flutters, if it's going like this and it's deflecting, or if it's kind of getting the profiles getting broken up by all those trees, like if there's a whole lot of them, I like that. I like the idea of that. And it doesn't need to be like a big flutter spoon either. Like a lot of times in the winter time, when fish don't want to move a lot, a slab spoon is really good. That has less action. But for whatever reason, I like to throw that in like a timber field, you know, rather than just a lay down. I like to throw it in a field of timber. I don't know. It makes sense to me the way that mechanically, the way that it interacts. You could do like a weedless option on your hook to where it's not just an open treble hook, you know, for those situations. But I like spoons a lot, and I think that they have a lot of potential and could do really good things. Drop shot, deep diver, spoon, Carolina rig. You know, I talk a lot about swim baits. That's so unique in my opinion. I think it really excels in the clear water. You know, that's really specific to like the area that we live in here, because there's so much clear water and it's so natural, right? And so it'd be badass to throw that thing out, fire it out there, get it down to the depth, get it way down there to where you can just barely crank it and you're just feeling it hit off of those treetops in that field, that stump field like I'm talking about. You know what I mean? That would be the ideal. I would love that. And so I hope that you kind of get an idea of what I mean by all the offshore areas. I'm going to try to look, see if I see any more that are similar-ish. You know, like I said, whether it's the major creek channel or like a not as major but still pretty discernible, like this one here, I'm always trying to stay close to that fresh water. You know, I don't want to get back way back in this pocket where there's not much fresh water coming in and it's not that cool. That deep, cool, oxygen-rich water is what holds them big bait balls. You know, so that's where that food is for those fish. Here's another similar type of like, you know, that big deep flat situation. You see a roadbed cutting across here and stuff. This is kind of neat how, you know, you have this roadbed passing up into this little, what I would call the drain again, where it's pretty deep and then kind of comes up into the shallow U. There's also one here and it's on the side of it. You got this nice little feature out here where you have kind of a you have a pretty like a nice little ledge right here where it goes from like 14, 16, 18 and it's an elongated bar and it drops off. But you don't, the only thing about this here is that this creek channel kind of peters out, and so this to me isn't as desirable as something that was closer to this really obvious kind of creek right here. I mean, it's an extension of it, obviously, but it's not as prominent for me. And I just think the big fish like that channel, even in spawning situations. Like, let's just say that this was a spawning flat and the depths were different. Let's say that up here where it said 49, it was like 10 or 8 or 6 or whatever. And this was the deep water right here. I'd want to be pretty close to this because it's after they spawn, they go right out to the channel and they recover and do whatever. Or pre-spawn, they move in there real quick. And if the conditions change and it's unfavorable, boom, they go back out to the channel. It's more stable out there. So I'm looking at that more. I mean, this is kind of a cool little area to look at. It's worth maybe looking at for sure. But there's going to be seasonality that you have to consider when you do that. Don't just spend all your time looking over there for sure. Like I said, these roadbeds here where they interact with like this ditch or drain, like I call it, this U shape, that's worth looking at. One thing to point out is that the location of that roadbed is not going to be exactly what you see on avionics. So you need to go through with your graph and mark it, you know, every so often, and then zoom out on your graph after you've marked it, you know, and you can see where it actually is comparison to what they show on the map. It's not always going to be the same. It's very rarely going to be the same at all. So that's one thing to consider. But those roadbeds are very unique. Those drains and ditches are unique, you know. I told you what kind of baits I like to throw. And so hopefully that's pretty complete. I'm trying to do as best as I can with being complete in a video. It's very tough. It's like years of, you know, looking at it and fishing the lake and all that. But docks. Okay, that's the next thing, docks. So we went bluffs, offshore, structure, and docks. Okay, so let's think about the dock situation. So once again, so here's another thing. I can fish bluffs where there's docks, okay? Because it doesn't matter if it's 100 foot of water. If the dock float is sitting like, let's say 5 foot, whatever, the bottom of the dock float, those fish can be sucked up underneath that dock float and be over 100 foot of water, and they still have access to that deep water. So that's important. So like if I look at, let me just, for example, let me think about this here. So like let's go back here a little bit. You know, this is that bluff wall, that one of the initial ones that we talked about, where you have the transition here with this loop that comes out, and then you have this over here, this little flat point. When I talk about the features of this bluff and not just fishing the whole thing, you have the ends, the areas where the rocks come off, and then also you have like this dock right here, these couple docks. This could be like a really good, you might want to try docks like this, you know, because they add to the value of that bluff situation, you know. And then you look at what's the difference between both of these docks. So the difference between both of these docks is you have one dock that has a small platform, you have one dock that has a really big platform, right? Or a group of platforms or whatever. Just looking at it on Navionics. That's one thing, because there's a lot more shade on this dock and surface area, an area for food and bait to hide. The other thing is that this dock extends out farther into that channel. So it's even closer to all that oxygen-rich water. It's even closer to all that deep, those bait fish and all that that are swimming around. It gets a lot more wind, and it's better. It's better. That open access out there in the middle is so much better. It's so much more conducive for growth and like life. So those two docks, definitely I would look at them both. I would look at them both, and I'd fish them really thoroughly. And how would I fish these docks, okay, is the main thing. Now, 90% of people that I see that have like an average skill set are fishing the ends of the docks, and they may make like a skip underneath the dock. It's only going to go under a couple feet. Like, the real professional way is to go home and practice and practice and practice and practice. And on your little, if you have a little pond or a freaking pool or whatever, it doesn't matter, try to do that sidearm cast constantly and master that. There's tutorials and all this stuff on YouTube, but master that and get to where you can throw that thing in the size of like a softball. And I mean a softball. If you can throw it in the size of a softball and just, you can hit those small little openings underneath the dock, you can get that thing in there when you whip it in there high speed, like 30, 40 feet. I mean, freaking way back in there to where they haven't expected to see a bait back in there for a long, 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 long time. And them big ones know. Them big ones know there's pressure on this side of the dock. There's pressure on this side of the dock. Boats always pull up here and they throw at this little pillar. The big ones know that. So they're not used to seeing that jig come by their face at the very back of the dock where there hasn't been any baits, right? So that's the advantage. So I'm doing that skipping. I'm doing different baits. I'm doing jigs. Okay, I'm doing, with the big surface area of the jig, it helps to skip more. I'm using pretty fat line, heavy pound test so that it floats better. I'm doing like big trailers on my jigs, more surface area again. I'm doing Senkos. I'm doing little Nico rig Senkos. I'm doing like, there's a lot of different things you can do. I would say the main ones are the jig or the Senko for sure. I'm trying to think of some other ones, and I know there are, but that's what's on my mind right now is the jigs and the Senkos, right? So the wide surface area on the jigs, the Senko, it just has a killer action and it skips really good when it's wacky. Okay, that's important. And then also the fat line, you gotta have the fat line for sure. But those are the types of docks, like, and then you look at what distinguishes like a line of 100 docks. It's like the subtleties and like I said, how the surface area, the coverage of the dock floats. Are there verticals on the dock, or is there also horizontal members? The metal portions of the dock. There's a lot of things that you just want to have uniqueness and differences. So let's look at like some more docks, and it, like, once again, I can't stress enough, it is not about going through the lake and just finding the exact spots that I'm pointing out, because I'm not even thinking right now. Okay, I fished this lake a ton, but I'm not thinking about that. That's not what's important. You got to train your mind to think about all lakes equally. So like, let's just look at these docks, for example, okay? I don't know that I 100% want to start there. I'm gonna look around for a second here and try to find what looks appetizing. Okay. I just really want to give a good example, and I don't want to mess it up. So here's probably a pretty good example, okay? This is another deal. If you get any one thing from my video here, it's that I like the freaking proximity to the channel. Okay, so let's say that this river comes through here. You got this bluff wall right here, bluff situation, like we said, where there's a cut bank on the outside bend. Now, where this starts here, you have a little bit of a flat point situation, and it comes into this sharp deal. All these docks are on this sharp drop right here. Bing, 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 all of them. This one is a combination of sharp, close to flat, and it's isolated by itself. That's another big thing. Okay, and it's got a weird shape on it. I don't know. Could be good. But that is what I'm looking for, is that transitionary type deal. So just like with the bluff thing again, what makes a bluff good? It makes the bluff is good at the ends, at the areas where things drop off, where there's differences, where there's trees that come up, where there's like, you know, docks, whatever. So this is another one. You got this dock at this creek channel swing. It's out by itself, so you know it's a landmark. They're not going to swim to a bunch of docks because there's not one super nearby. There's some over here, but there's nothing like right next to it like there is over here, where they just go bing, 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 bing. They could be on any one of those. So you eat up a lot of time with that. This is, to me, a sure bet. Guaranteed at some point they're going to be on this dock, and probably a lot of the year they're going to be on this dock. And then also on this dock, they may stay on this dock for a long time, and they may like come up to the shallow side of the dock and put a nest. Or they may go off the very end and recover, and may be out there when it's like freezing cold and they just want to get deep. If there's, let's just say also there may be black floats on this thing. Sometimes there's black floats on these docks. They may be under that black float when it's sunny to get warmth. Like, they're going to use this dock in a lot of different situations. Let's say that the wind blows in from one side. They may get on that side and ambush prey, and they may look and face that direction into the wind. But the whole thing I'm getting at is that they can use this dock for a lot of different things, and so it's not safe to go just fish the end of it out here by the channel and never fish up in front of it. That's another thing that I want to point out. That's another important thing, is you want to use all portions of the dock per the seasonality, or at least check it. You know what I mean? It's worth checking if you're right there in this one dock, for God's sakes. You know, fish the end of it, fish up in the walkways, look for the unique supports, and where there's a lot, you know, converging together, all those supports, cross members and all that. Look for like a sea-doo maybe, or just a freaking couple pool noodles that are strung together that are creating shade. I mean, just, you want to be creative, but those are the types of docks. And once again, it's about the skipping in there. You can do, there's another thing I want to point out, very important, is the jig, or not the jig, sorry. The spoon. The spoon. That's not one that I've talked about for the docks. So the spoon, when you talk about these deep bait balls that I'm talking about, like the gizzard shad, the freaking gizzard shad get huge, okay? You got the threadfin shad that are swimming around, they're not as big, right? Whatever. But those deep bait balls get under these docks, like on a much deeper level, usually. They swim around, usually deeper. Sometimes they come up a little bit depending on the conditions, but you can get that big freaking flutter spoon for those gizzard shad, drop it down there on semi-slack line, and just start jigging that thing. And if there's bait in the area and it looks natural, and it, you know, it just glimmers, the light glimmers off of it and it looks very natural, you can get those big ones to hit that thing thinking it's a gizzard shad. And when they hit that freaking spoon, it's like, bam! I mean, it's just like they crush it. They freaking smoke it, and it's nothing like that. Especially when they hit it on the fall or something, or like you're reeling it in, they just chase it and hammer it. It's like they're gonna murder that thing. So the spoon's a really, really good one for that exact reason. Like when you're trying to mimic the bait balls, you could also do. You could also throw out that, like, let's say you get on one end of the dock and you throw way over the back of it. You can let that freaking Alabama rig sink, you know, and just take its time to get down there and slow roll that thing. You know, if it's windy or something and it's kind of, the profile's broken up a little bit and you have some like silver blades on that, and the sun can hit it and reflect to where it's just like more of a flash, like a school of flash. They can't see it very well. That might be damn good. But those are all options. The spoon, the Alabama rig. So I think where I messed up on the first video that I did for this is I didn't really take into account, I didn't really look at the full lake and give a really comprehensive view. And it's not just about this lake, it's just how do I approach this style of lake where there's the features that there are with the offshore stuff, with the bluffs, with the clear water. There's so many of those lakes in this area. But I feel like my main thing is just making sure that my viewer understands what to look for. It's really not enough. Like if you go out on a weekend, are you just going to fall around boats that look like they're expensive bass boats? Oh, they must know what they're doing. I mean, maybe. But the thing is too, like, why can't you go out and do your own thing, And if you have the tools, you don't need someone you don't need someone to walk you through it while you're out there. You can just say, hey, you know what? Makes sense. It's hotter than hell outside. They're probably suspended. Maybe they're close to the creek channel. Maybe, you got to think and do your own program, but you have to learn how to think. And that's what I'm trying to do with all of this, with these tutorials and everything, is teach how to think. So that's going to wrap up my video. It's been a while. It's already 8:30 p.m. and I want to go lay down and relax. I have to get up for work. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it's better than the first video. And just, man, comment, subscribe if you like it. I'm going to continue to do my thing. I just want to put out great content. Call me for a freaking guide trip. Let's go fishing. Do an online tutorial with me. Spend a little bit of money that it is to learn what I do and how I do it. It's worth it. It's worth it. So thanks again for tuning in, checking it out, and we'll see you next time, because there's going to be some legit content coming out. So thanks.